All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for day 3 of Within Summit. We are so glad that you're here. Today, we are kicking things off with some incredible panelists. We are going to be discussing how to talk about your own mental health in media. And just as a quick reminder, we are recording our session live today. So if you would like to review anything, you can always go and watch the replay in your attendee dashboard. So first today, I would love to introduce our moderator, Ibbets Newhall. Ibbets, thank you so much for being here. Ibbets began her career as part of the original outreach team at Timberline Knowles in 2006, after over 25 years in theater, TV, and commercials. Ibbets joined Oliver Pyatt Centers in 2011 as Director of Outreach and was then appointed Vice President of Professional Relations for the Oliver Pyatt Centers, Montanito, and Clementine programs in 2016. From the very first, she was a fierce advocate for families and patients, and Ibbets also serves on the Within Health Advisory Board. Ibbets, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we also have some wonderful panelists joining us today. I would love to introduce Jared Lindzon, who is a freelance journalist and public speaker based in Toronto. Beyond Jared's regular columns in Fast Company and The Globe and Mail, he has also been published in the New York Times, The Guardian, Politico, the BBC, Rolling Stone, Fortune Magazine, Time Magazine, and many more. Jared is regularly asked to share the insights he's learned through the years of reporting on the future of work in keynote presentations at events around the world, and has shared the stage with experts from a range of disciplines as a moderator and an interviewer. Jared, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I also would love to introduce Allison Walsh, who is the VP of Business Development at Advanced Recovery Systems. Allison Walsh is a seasoned executive, philanthropist, speaker, professional coach, and consultant, and Miss Florida 2006. A two-time CEO for national coaching firms and certified positive psychology coach, Allison has over 15 years of organizational leadership, mentorship, and coaching experience, and has shared her story with over 100,000 live audience members. She serves as Vice President of Business Development and Branding for Advanced Recovery Systems, a national provider and industry leader in behavioral health care. Allison, thanks for being here.
So glad to be here. Thank you so much.
And lastly, I would like to introduce Aalia Lanius. She is an international multi-award winning novelist, publisher, executive producer, and host of the award-nominated social good talk show Unsugarcoated with Aalia. As president and founder of Unsugarcoated Media, a 501c3 media production enterprise, Alia's role extends to leadership as a creative, and she is considered a thought leader in approaches to media, believing that artists are pioneers of the human mind with great potential and responsibility to positively influence society through proper representation and accountability. Thanks for being here. We are so excited to have you all. I'm going to pass things off to Ibbets.
Thanks so much, Kath. And it is just such a pleasure to be with all these extraordinary humans. And so I will kick it off. And Aalia, maybe we can start with you and work our way around. I'm going alphabetically. What first compelled you to really talk about your own, mental health and in media and, privately as well as publicly, because I think it often starts with that, those private conversations that we have as well. So I'd love to hear your story and, tell us a little bit about yourself and your history and what landed you into revealing more about your own history.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. To be honest, I went through a divorce in 2014, and to kind of shorten the story in some ways, I remember being on Facebook and getting messages from people who were like, "You're inspiring me." I'm also a 3-time cancer survivor. And so a lot of people knew a portion of what I was dealing with. And even with that, they would send me these messages. And I was like, you're only getting a fraction of the story. Here, let me tell you more. And so, I was at a point in my life, I'd actually sold my previous business as a part of my divorce. And I really had the opportunity to do what I wanted. I'd been a businesswoman for over 20 years and a good writer. And I said, and it was a very empowering moment. It wasn't cathartic for me. I was already operating from a place of healing. And so I said, I'm going to put this finally in a story. And my first novel was a biographical fiction novel of a time that was very difficult. It's the journey of a woman going through the end of a marriage, an unhealthy, toxic, with abuse in it, and yet coming out on the other side. And the first time that I was really struck by the power of our ability to write our own story as well as highlight others was when someone wrote me and said, I'm actually filing for divorce from my abusive husband after reading your book. And that's not that I'm a proponent of divorce, but I am a proponent for healthy spaces and healthy living. And so that was kind of the beginning of my journey in 2017. So,
That's extraordinary. Did you have any reticence or fear about expressing some of these most intimate and personal of experiences?
Absolutely. And it's ironic that some of the most real and authentic moments in that novel, or in the book rather, which are very true. The fiction part of the little things that you kind of make fictional, change people's names, but all the conversations and actually the things that happened were real. And to have somebody actually review my book and say, well, that was a little over the top. Like, wait, but that really happened. What do you mean? And fear from the family. Culturally, I was taught you don't air your dirty laundry in public, right? To come out with my truth was, again, empowering. And I was not afraid. I think because I was operating, again, an empowered heart lets go of the attachment of what the outcome is going to be. You're okay. And I remember my ex-husband, actually, and I'll just say this, he kind of sent me a text. He said, so I heard you wrote a book about me. And I was like, boy, if only, if only I had written a book about you. No, I wrote my story, but thank you very much. So that's kind of how I took it.
Yeah,
But
says so much.
Yeah. But as a publisher, I just have to say, like, I've held events, and people, when it comes to writing their own story, that is a big issue. Well, what are my family going to say? What are the people that suddenly their truths are also going to be out there? And so it's a very valid point, and it's not always easy to overcome, but I'm thankful that I was able to handle it that way.
That's amazing. And I think, that you bring up such a great point about the ripple effect in one's own personal life of saying, this is who I am, this is what's happened, this is what's happening. And it lays bare, things that everyone's been tiptoeing around for so long. Allison, can you share a little bit about your own experience and your own journey, to beginning to speak your truth, both personally and professionally and out in public and in the media?
Absolutely. Thank you. And, I think for me, it was really a mentor and somebody I cared deeply about in my life. And she looked at me and said, Allison, you've been blessed with a voice to tell your story. And there are so many people that are struggling with this in silence. And if it's something that aligns with your mission and message, like, you should really consider doing this. And those words were spoken to me when I was 18 years old. I had struggled for 3.5 years with bulimia and anorexia. And I had this fire in my soul of not wanting anybody else to experience what I had or not feel alone. I mean, that was back in 2001 when those words were spoken to me. And, eating disorders and mental health has come a long way as far as being able to talk about it since then. But back then it was really not discussed very much at all. And so I appreciated her seeing that passion within me and walking alongside me to help me be able to share responsibly. That was also really important to me. I didn't want to trigger people. I didn't want to have any negative impact on anybody, more so just saying, like, you are not alone. This is what I've gone through. And, you can get better, you can get well, but let's get you help. And so that was really the catalyst for it all. And then it just continued to grow as I, had the opportunity to share with larger groups. And when I got to college and, on my campus, and then it just continued to snowball from there. But it was a really incredible experience, but I was very mindful, right, of doing it responsibly. And, also being open and honest with those in my inner circle, right? Like you have to share personally almost sometimes before you share on a grander scale. At least that was my wish and my intention, and something that I wanted to know that they were behind me too, right? I had their support, because it was a very honest recount of what I had gone through, and it wasn't pretty, right? And so, but I wanted to make sure that it was being done with the best of intentions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's amazing. I think, in my own experience, because let's talk about me, that being in a sense of denial too, for a period of time, and pushing everyone away, and finally having that moment where you can say, this is what I am, this is what I did, this is what I was feeling. And it was, and and I'm getting the sense that for all of you, it's not dissimilar, this sense of liberation, the weight being lifted off your shoulders, that I'm not going to pretend that this didn't happen, wasn't happening, etc. Jared, over to you. And I would love to hear about what your journey was, and what was that moment where the light bulb went off and you said, I need to share this in a larger sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I actually think that the last point that Allison made is a good place for me to start, because I too was in denial for a very long time. Looking back on my life now with the clarity that I have, I can say that I've had depressive episodes for as long as I can remember. Back into childhood, I've struggled with insomnia. Just recently, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which is a fun thing to learn at the age of 33. Would have been really good to know that 20 years ago, but hindsight is 2020. But my sort of breaking point, I guess, or the reason why I'm here today, that story begins around 2016. I was having a rough time. Things weren't going great in a lot of different areas, but there were things that I can point to and say, I'm upset because this happened or that happened. There were very external realities that, would have made anyone just a little bit not in a great place. But those things eventually resolved themselves, and the feeling didn't. I know now that I'm susceptible to being stuck in that feeling, but the things that I was pointing to and saying, I'm upset because of this, that, and the other, they had been resolved, but I was still, now I know, depressed. But I only used the word depressed with one friend one time, and was, just petrified of admitting it to myself, much less to others. I thought once I name it, then it becomes real. And once it becomes real, it becomes a real problem that I now have to take a real solution to, whether that's medication, which sounded really scary, therapy, which sounded way too expensive and difficult. There wasn't really a solution. So denial was easier than acceptance. And the craziest part about it was that the depression ended at a very specific moment. And it, like I said, I've had these episodes throughout my life, but never have I experienced a sudden end. And that end, very dramatically, I went skydiving. I had promised myself for some reason that if I ever went to Dubai, I had a lot of friends who have been to Dubai and gone skydiving, and it's known for aerial sports. And I thought, if I'm ever there, I'm going to try it. And so for work, one day I ended up in Dubai. I went to the skydiving center. I put my name on a list. I assumed, it was last minute. They had a full schedule. I thought, okay, at least put my name down. I can go home satisfied in the knowledge that I at least tried my best. I was very upset to get a call an hour later. Someone had canceled. And, soon after, I was standing at the edge of an open doorway in an airplane over the Arabian Peninsula. And so something happened to me in that moment, and I've tried to describe it, and I've spoken with experts. As a journalist, I wanted to explore this, although it took me a while to discuss it, but I wanted to understand what had happened. And there is a growing body of research that is finding connections between extreme sports and mental health. And I think there's this acknowledgement that there is some there, but that it's really hard to define. But for me, for whatever reason, I came out of that experience changed. And specifically the depression that I've been dealing with for 7, 8, 9 months consistently. You know, I'd only been calling it as much for 1 or 2 months, but what I now know was happening for a really long period of time just suddenly ended. And so I had this, you know, pretty transformative experience that I kept to myself for a long time, because talking about it meant sharing my story, and I was not at a point where I was ready to share that story. And as a freelance journalist and as you know, an ambitious reporter, trying to, you know, reach as many new publications, as you can tell from my introduction, I've been published in a lot of places. You know, the New York Times is the pinnacle of, you know, the English language media world. And as a freelance journalist, there's no place I'd rather see my name than the New York Times. And one time I got into a conversation with an editor at the New York Times, and we're kicking around story ideas. And for some reason, I mentioned this experience that I had. It had been about a year. I felt a little bit more comfortable talking about it, but still hadn't talked about it to anyone in my personal life. And through that conversation, you know, a few days later, I got an email saying, like, we're going to publish this story in the New York Times. So, you know, oh my God, my first story in the New York Times, that's huge. But oh my God, now I need to sit down with every single person in my life and tell them that this story is going to be published in the New York Times. So it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down, because, you know, as a freelance journalist, it was a huge opportunity, but it also meant confronting my own experiences and sitting down with people and having those conversations. You know, my immediate family members, my best friends, nobody knew that what I had been through. And I had never used the D word, you know, in conversation with any of my friends and family before. And so I went through this, you know, couple of weeks where I had to arrange some very awkward dinner plans with every single person, and sit them down and say, listen, this story is coming out, and here's what it's going to say. And, you know, I know now what I went through, but I didn't know it at the time. And, you know, I got a lot of difficult questions out of it from folks in my life. There was some degree of understanding. There was some misunderstanding for sure. But the biggest takeaway for me is that, you know, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 of the folks that I sat down with, my family and friends, the people closest in my life, said, you know, I've experienced the same thing. I've been through this before. I'm going through this right now. And, you know, the fact that I was hiding from them and they were hiding from me at the same time, and we're both going through the same thing and feeling so alone, that's what made me really encouraged to share my stories as widely and as frequently as I can. And one of the reasons why I'm here today.
I had this feeling as you're describing this, oh, I'm going to get a piece in the New York Times, yay. And then it's like, this is what it's going to be about. And I had this feeling of you being in the plane over the desert, like, okay, the door's open. Do I really have to jump here? You know,
I made that parallel in my writing as well, because I don't know which one was scarier, but both of them turned out to be transformative in very different ways.
Right. And what I'd like to circle around to that confronting that fear. And I'd love both Aalia and Allison to talk about what fear they may have had. And I think it's particularly important because we see public figures coming out to discuss their own mental illness, their own bouts with substance use or eating disorders or a combo platter. And the reaction is varied. And so, you know, as people who are public figures and public writers and speakers, you know, that there can be a little bit of blowback or a lot of blowback. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I you know, that sense of fear that each of you had, and Allison, I'll start with you about what was that moment of jumping out of the plane. What did that feel like?
I had a lot of jumping out of the plane moments, literally and figuratively as well. So, but yeah, it was, I'll never forget the first time. So kind of going back to that story with my mentor, you know, we worked on how I would share that story. And she said, are you ready? You know, when I was ready, we created an opportunity for me to be in a safe place with a small audience of people that were just like me. And so that helped a lot. But I was scared. I was afraid of the words just even coming out of my mouth. I was afraid of how I would be received. I worried that I wouldn't know what to do next if I was asked a question or what to say. So, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. And I think something that has helped me so much over the years, I mean, I've been sharing my story for 20 plus years at this point. I focus on helping the one person in the room that needs me, because just statistically, there's more than that. But if there's one person that does something as a result of me being brave enough to share my story and my experiences, then that's why I'm there. And you'll never please everyone. I think that's something that, is said so often, but not often. It doesn't resonate with everybody, but you can't try to be everything to everyone. You just need to be there for those that you're there to serve. And when you have that mindset, it allows you to show up in a very authentic way without worrying so much about being perfect in the moment or saying the exact right thing, or what are people going to think about me? Like, I've adopted the mentality that I lived through this for a reason and I'm here to create change and help people. And when I focus on that and why I'm there, it makes all the difference with how I show up.
Yeah, 100%. Aalia?
Yeah, and I mean, I love that you brought that up. So my experience personally was a bit different. One, because, and this is kind of a story. I was talking to Garrett last night about this. He says, you've got to tell that because it is part of how I ended up overcoming fear. But my overcoming fear, or just a recognition of fear in my life and how it definitely crippled me when I was younger, actually landed me in jail at 18 years old. A quick story: when I was 5 years old, my mom fell down in front of me on a flight of stairs, and we were at my grandparents' house, and it was very early in the morning. I was getting ready to go to school, and she's laying on the ground. She's like, go get grandma and grandpa. Well, it just so happened I was raised in a family that was so traditional that you did not wake up grandma and grandpa in the morning. So I remember being 5, going up to the door and like so petrified that I just couldn't. I was so consumed by fear. I went back to my mom. She said, are they coming? I said, everything's going to be fine. I went back to the living room, grabbed my jacket, walked to school. I was 5. Okay. Fear had, and when I came home, like, the response was, why did you leave her? Well, I wasn't supposed to wake up grandma and grandpa. Okay, well, next time be very quiet. See, still reinforcing, this horrible, thing that I had to overcome. So here I am, 18 years old. I go to get a car. I go to buy a car. The guy lets me take it, takes my license. He said, go show your friends, family. I do this. Several hours later, he starts calling. He's angry. He's leaving me pager messages. This is how long ago it was. And I am consumed by fear. How do I handle with fear? I already told you guys, I run in the other direction at that moment in my life. And that's what I did. And I stayed home with the car. And 3 days later, the cops came and took me to jail for grand theft auto. Let me tell you, when I left that jail cell 3 months later, because I had no money to bail myself out and I had no family to bail me out, I had overcome fear in a whole different way in my life. I was more afraid of the world thinking that that's what I was, this criminal. So it was a very interesting journey. By the time, 20 years later, 20 plus years later, when I wrote and started, really getting involved in media, and actually in 2017, the first year that my book was released, my husband and I are also executive producers and work in film very heavily. To the Bone came out with Keanu Reeves, Lily Collins, which we were part of that project. And several others since then. It's been more about showing the world what you can accomplish when you're not afraid. And even when I fought cancer, another moment I had to overcome, like, my first storytelling was to my own children in a video, just in case I was not going to make it. It was a video to say goodbye, how much I loved them, how much they meant to me. And I'm sure any parent or any person who has somebody that they love in their life can understand. So fear for me, in fact, when Jared was talking about coming out of that plane, I think the studies do correlate to, like, when you have looked death in the eye, or something that really threatens your well-being, or in a moment seems like, hey, this could be it. But when you challenge that, it changes the game for you. So when I started getting out in media, and especially because that's why unsugar-coated media is unsugar-coated. Again, we're not pretending these things don't exist. We are going to have conversations. I welcome celebrities and notable figures to come on and talk to me and share with our audience how they have overcome those challenges as well. So for me, sure, there are times, my second novel took on racism and white supremacy. Was I a little fearful that my name is going to be thrown in a hat of people who are unliked and targeted for that? Yes, a little bit, of course. I have a family. I'm vulnerable to some extent, like everyone else. But it meant more to me to be a voice and shine a light on areas that we need to. Because if we don't, then, as we've reiterated multiple times here, people feel alone and isolated. And we work together to end that isolation and build community for survivors of trauma, in my opinion.
Wonderful. You know, it occurs to me too, and I want to get all of your thoughts on this. There's, you know, I think there's this notion that you can maybe only tell your story if you're on the other side. And I think what we're seeing in some of the public figures is they're in the thick of it. And, you know, and being honest about it and how this is, you know, has hampered their ability to move through life, to move through their sport, to move through their art. And I think we have this, you know, fairy tale notion that it all has to have a perfect and happy ending and tied up with a nice little bow. And I think what has been compelling, and I'd like to get each of your thoughts on this, is sometimes when someone's saying, this is happening now, this is happening to me now, and this is what I'm fighting against. And I think that that's got to be a particularly frightening thing when you can't say, I've got this under control, because as all of us know, getting it all under control is sometimes a daily exercise and a daily activity. So I wanted to get some of your thoughts on that, you know, that doesn't have to be a fairy tale kind of ending of revelation. Jared, any thoughts?
Well, I wish I had more to say on this subject, because no, I think it's very, very well put, and a very important point. I personally don't have too much experience with sharing a story of what's happening while it's happening. As
Right.
you heard, my story was more in retrospect, and you know, I've been through situations since then, and yeah, I still struggle with that. I don't know that while I'm in the thick of it, I'm prepared to discuss what I'm going through, because I don't want to invite unsolicited advice that only makes me more upset or feel more, helpless in the situation. And so I wish I had more to say on the subject, but unfortunately, that's something that I'm still not great at, and still learning about. And I think, unlike the other panelists, this isn't my main area of expertise, of coverage. I write about the future of work. I write about technology. People aren't coming to me to hear my mental health story, and I have to really go out of my way to share it. And I'm not really in a place where I'm going out of my way to share it when I'm in the thick of it, because I'm still not entirely comfortable with what that looks like. But I would love to hear the other panelists' advice for me, for what to do when I'm in that situation and afraid to share my experience as it's happening.
I mean, I'll chime in. I mean, I think for so long I was of the opinion that it was best for me, right? And it's a very personal decision as to when and where and how you want to share what's going on in your life. For so many years, I was, I opted on the side of I'd much rather speak from the scar than the open wound. And I wanted to make sure that I was in a good place, and that, if I was sharing it, it was really with the best of intentions to help other people also, take care of what they needed to take care of for themselves. But I will say that I went through a pretty significant situation with burnout last year. And it wasn't too far after I had made some adjustments and really done some work and gotten the support that I needed that I started talking about that. And the reason that I did it sooner than I had with my eating disorder struggle was that I saw so much of it happening around me. And while I wasn't there to be a therapist or anything like that, right? That's not my role. I was there to be an advocate for them, to say, hey, you can make these changes in your life, and you can, make different decisions or do what you need to do for yourself. And it was just so pervasive. And I couldn't help but say, listen, like, I just went through this myself. But again, I wasn't super in the middle of it. When I was going through it, like, I was in it, right? Like, I was definitely needing the time and space for me. And I think that if I would have invited in and been very open while I was, dealing with the day to day, it would have been very challenging for me. But that was a personal decision. Others are different, right? They feel like they can handle that, and that's their decision. And but again, I think it always should be with the best of intentions of like, hey, I'm struggling. If you're struggling, get help, right? Like, you don't have to feel like you're alone in this process. But yeah, it's been really good to see the positive impact now that I've been on the other side of it, of encouraging people to take care of themselves. And that was the mission and the motivation behind even sharing it to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to just throw in there that from one perspective, I actually remember reaching out definitely in the thick of one of the multiple challenges I was going through, and maybe I would allow that part to be seen, but not every other part. One of those that I didn't even see for a moment was the eating disorder, to be quite honest. So I'm like, while I'm being open and honest about other things, there were still parts I was not sharing, right? And but I remember laying in a hospital bed, and that's when I was dealing with my cancer and my illness, and I was not sure what was going to happen. And I remember the only thing I had was my laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, and I plugged into a group of young cancer adults in Facebook, and that moment changed my life, because from what I was going through, I was able to express what I was dealing with. And to this day, some of those people, including the founder of Stupid Cancer, Matthew Zachary, who's a very, very good friend of mine, reached back and actually changed the projection of my own battle, because suddenly now I had people saying, thank you for sharing. Thanks for inviting us in. Now get up off your butt and fight, and it was like, it was what I needed in that moment. But I was more writing to a group of people as opposed to publicly, the way that I do now, and the way that I have, my staff work on projects and report on social issues, and sometimes we're called on to talk on issues that are happening. As journalists, Jared would know, you're talking sometimes about things while they're happening and you don't know the outcomes, but you are trying to bring awareness to them regardless. Look at right now what's happening in Iran. These are important times for us to, and the media is so incredibly powerful. If Joseph Goebbels didn't teach us how powerful media is, you still can look at Cuba. If anybody watch Cuba Libre, that's on Netflix right now, that they put it back up, and you see the way that media has always influenced. It's sometimes it shines a light, sometimes it creates a facade, but regardless, I take it very personal to be the voice of others in the thick of what they're going through if they can't. That's the journey I take on now. So it's, I think that I do think it's a very valid point. Are you able to talk about things while you're going through them? I think sometimes if you're, like we said earlier, the denial, you don't even recognize you're going through them. Because when I was dealing with my cancer, I really did not see myself struggling with an eating disorder at the time. But of course, at some point, then I had to acknowledge it. And then I had to say, okay, and everyone thought I was normal. Everyone thought I was fine, but I wasn't. So 100%, just I was compartmentalizing, which I think all of us can be very good at doing at times, right? So yeah, that's my thought on that.
Yeah, I love that. And as you were talking, Allison, I was thinking and talking about burnout, just to circle back to the last couple of years. And it'll be very interesting in the days and weeks and years to come as we begin to understand what's happened to all of us in, difficult ways and in some great ways. The burnout in my what I do, I was really struggling, and our grandchildren were visiting us, and my then 5-year-old was having a bit of a problem. And she said, Momo, I don't feel like myself. And I looked at her and said, I don't feel like myself either right now. And it was, that kind of that acknowledged that, we're on this sort of uncertain ground often these days, and it goes in those waves. To touch on something that both Allison and Aalia have said, you have been, very vocal about the personal stories you had in dealing with mental health and eating disorders on your platforms. And What would you say? And then I'm gonna let you jump in, Jared, I promise. What have been some of the more surprising reactions, maybe some of the ones that you didn't expect, both positively and negatively?
Yeah. So on the positive side, I mean, I think that those are the easy ones, right?
Yeah,
Like
right. Those are
the ones that you pray for. Like you're like, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm sharing.
right, exactly.
And I welcome those, right? And I think especially when people feel like they're seen and heard, like, and you create a space for them, like, and Aalia, what you were saying about like community, right? Like creating opportunities for individuals with shared experiences to come together is such a powerful thing to be able to do. Or, using your platform, your voice to create change or just to spark conversations. So, wonderful. But there are always those negative ones that show up. And sometimes that one negative voice is louder than the thousands of positive, right? And so learning how to manage that. And then again, just honoring wherever that person is in their journey or what's going on or what came up for them by reading something I said or listening to something that I said or mentioned or shared. So, I try to not judge the individual at all, right? And I just allow them compassion and understanding, and I try to move on because that's, again, that one voice. But for those of us that really want to do good in this world, or just, maybe have a little bit of a people pleaser in us, it can be hard to hear. But again, there's so much good out there that has happened. I think the more you put yourself out there, the bigger your platform becomes, or the stage you're on is, or the louder your microphone is, you're going to attract those that aren't necessarily as supportive of your message. But again, you're there to help everybody else that is. And, and even in the early days of sharing, right? I'll never forget, I was on my college campus talking to any student group or sorority that would let me, because I just recognized that it was so prevalent on campus. And I knew the message wouldn't resonate, especially from those that weren't ready to hear it, was most importantly, like when I noticed it the most. But I was validated in my efforts when, about 6 months later, a girl that had come to one of my presentations pulled me aside and she said, I know, I haven't been here for a while. And I was like, yeah, where have you been? She's like, I went to treatment after I heard you talk. And it was like one of those moments where I remember her being in the room. I remember not feeling like there was that connection or maybe some resistance, but to know that she then went and did something about it. It's like, you never know where somebody is on their journey. So, they might need to hear this message more than all of the people that are cheering you on. So that's the way I try to approach it, but it can be hard at times for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll start with the positive as well. And I totally agree with Allison. She made some great points. And I think and I speak for myself and my husband, like I said, everyone has this idea of Hollywood and what we're about and what we want to do and the type of films we want to make and what we want to amplify. We're very fortunate that we end up getting involved in a lot of projects that are geared at mental health, ironically enough, or these social issues in, outside of To the Bone with Keanu Reeves and Lily Collins. We had The Card Counter that came out last year with Oscar Isaac and Tiffany Haddish, which was on mental health. We have Called Jane, which is coming up, which is a women's rights film. So it's nice to shatter the stereotype that we only care about the blockbusters, So you have a film, To the Bone. If anyone has seen it, fantastic job. Lily Collins is an amazing actress. Obviously, Keanu Reeves, who does not love Keanu Reeves for the most part? We were I think because of that, we had such a great response to a very highly sensitive film. The feedback was mostly good, for the first time in a long time, there was that proper representation. And even myself watching it, I'm like, oh, I recognize that behavior. Oh, I recognize that behavior. Look, and I even, it was educational, and yet in it provided a perspective. And being in media and being in film, that's one of the most wonderful takeaways, is that you really learn that there are always different perspectives, even literally like when you film, you have the wide angle lens, you've got fisheye, you've got, are we zooming in, and how you place your camera is going to create the perspective that you're giving your audience. And so with films and with mostly the feedback that we've gotten is mostly positive. But of course, there's people who are like, oh, again, now that's a bit over the top, but that's real for certain people who are going through it. And to Allison's point, you know, I mean, look, and something even I take on what Oprah said once. Oprah wrote or produced Beloved, which she thought was an amazing project and was a very dear and near project to her heart. But it was not received well at all by many people. And it was largely considered a failure as a film. But she didn't care. Again, she divorced herself from the idea that she needed to have this certain outcome. All she was responsible was for creating that content and putting it out into the world with the best of intentions. And you release it and let it go. And whatever happens from there is what happens, because you're not making it for everyone. You're making it for a certain person who needs to see that and say, I feel that. And now I'm inspired to take action, or heard that or watched it. And I think that that is the most critical part to focus on, because you're always going to have the naysayers. You're always going to have the reviews that say that wasn't very good, or we didn't like this part. Okay, great. Well, thank you. You know, thanks for your opinion.
Moving on.
Good to have it. Moving on to the next.
Next. So Jared, circling back to you, you know, have you been surprised at you know, any of those reactions, and you know, being a writer and working for a lot of different outlets, you know, has there been any aspect of this that's been most surprising to you in all of this?
Well, I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna get back to your question in a second. I just had a couple of follow-up points to what's been mentioned already, because Allison's point about burnout, I forgot that I had written about burnout during the pandemic, because I'm writing about the future of work, and I'm writing about people, you know, and their relationships with their work. And I experienced a certain degree of burnout. I actually framed a story around decision paralysis, where my wife had asked me a very basic question, you know, what do you want to watch tonight on Netflix? And it felt like my brain just broke. Like I had made so many decisions that day. I was so burnt out. I was so tired. It was really like mid 2020, you know, no light at the end of the tunnel, worst part of the pandemic. And it was a very basic question. And I just like mentally collapsed, and then physically just collapsed. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't handle answering that question. And so I wrote about that, and it felt so commonplace at that point in time that I forgot I'd even written that story, because burnout was just so prevalent. And I think, as you mentioned before, we're going to be exploring the, you know, mental health implications of the last 2 years for a really long time. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon. A couple other quick things. So the best reaction I got to the story that I wrote about skydiving, I got a lot of interesting feedback. I think in journalism and media, you need a certain degree of a thick skin, because there's always critics. You know, I learned that very early on in my career. I wrote something very minor in my first year as a journalist. It wasn't a big story. It wasn't for a big publication. It didn't really matter, but they had a comment section, and any comment section is going to be, you know, a place for the worst of the worst of the internet. And our editor told me, you know, the people who are commenting are the ones who are reacting in a way because you have touched them in a way that they're uncomfortable feeling. And so, you know, I think, to go back to what the other panelists have been saying, it's, you know, oftentimes it's the negative feedback that you receive that, first of all, you got to take it with a grain of salt, and you got to have a thick skin if you're going to be in this business. And often, you know, the reality is the people who have the most visceral reaction are actually the ones who needed to hear that the most. But the best reaction I got, so I want to end on a positive note. Someone wrote me and said that their brother had died in a skydiving accident, and that for the last, you know, 10 years since it had happened, they really struggled to understand why, because their brother had gone skydiving on an almost weekly basis. And this guy was telling his brother, you know, one day this is going to kill you. Like, this is not safe. It's not healthy, the amount of skydiving. But he was an enthusiast, and he felt that it was safe. And anyway, he wrote me this email saying, you know, for the last, I forget how long, 8-10 years, I haven't really been able to understand my brother's death, but he suffered from depression his whole life. And I never equated the two. I never understood that there might be a connection between his obsession with skydiving and his mental health struggles. And so I remember just reading that and completely breaking down, and you know, just that's why you do it. And I think everyone who has shared their story has an experience like that, and it makes you want to share more, because you know that there's people out there that really need to hear it. And the last thing I will say is that when it comes to reactions to these sorts of things, I find that the differences are as we've been discussing, very cultural, and very generational too. You know, the reactions that I've had to even just having these conversations with people, I find, you know, the older they are, the more resistant they are to having that conversation, because it's a generational thing. You know, and the younger they are, the more very open, like in a pretty extreme way. I have a sister who's 10 years younger than me, and, you know, her generation is, they see no stigma, or at least to you know, by comparison to my generation and my parents' generation is completely different. You know, they'll talk about it, but they always have an uncomfortable look on their face. And I wouldn't want to bring it up with my grandparents, because they'll shut down that conversation before it goes anywhere. So I think there's cultural differences. I think there's generational differences. I think we need to acknowledge that not everyone is going to be, you know, at the same place when it comes to addressing this sort of topic. And I think, you know, we can do our part by sharing our story and reducing that stigma by a little bit, and making people a little bit more comfortable, and sort of making sure that when they look around, they see others who are sharing, and hopefully one day that brings them to a place where they're comfortable being on that same level, or maybe not, and that's okay too.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm a bit older than all of you, and so I grew up with older. My parents were also older. I was the youngest of three, and I grew up in an era where people didn't even say the word cancer out loud. It was whispered. It was somehow feared, like you could possibly catch it from someone. And so, and you think of the ripple effect of all the things that were secret, that were unspeakable, that were, you know, considered a sign of weakness, all of those things. And of course, we all know, and you all know in your experience, this is just so exhilarating hearing all of you, is that when we peel back that facade, those layers, that there are very few families who are untouched by a certain amount of this heartache, and some of it is greater than others. And I know that each of you has come across people whose lives have been touched in really profound and horrible ways by all of these various diseases and issues. And so to be able to shine a light, and a positive light, on it, as you all have done, I think is just amazing. You know, as you know, I suspect there are some other folks watching this that may be writers and media folks as well. And you know, what pearls of wisdom do each of you have for those who, you know, might be considering telling their stories, the kind of lessons learned, and the, you know, you've all spoken of the positives that outshine, you know, sometimes the negative blowback that you get. So, you know, what words of wisdom do you have, and advice for those who might be considering doing so in sharing the stories?
I mean, I'll start if that's okay. I think that for me, sharing my story is why I'm here today, right? Like having that brave moment when I was 18 to say, yes, I think I'm ready to share what I've experienced, has opened so many doors. It's why I'm in the behavioral health industry, and why I do what I do, and why I feel so grateful to be in such a purpose-driven position that I get to help people on a daily basis. And I get to also help my whole team tell their stories and share their stories so that we can help more people and have a bigger impact. So, I mean, it was a transformative moment in my life on so many different levels. And the benefits of doing so have far outweighed any negative. And I am so grateful for having the voice to tell my story. So if somebody's listening, thinking that they might want to share, you should, if you're ready, right? Or if you need additional support or guidance on how to do it, find it, because there are people out there that help with that too. And there's great guidelines on what to share, what not to share, and all of these wonderful resources that exist. But I will just say, like, I'm grateful for that person encouraging me, because I've had an amazing career in life as a result of being able to do so.
Yeah, it's opened so many doors.
So many, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
I'll go next.
Yeah, I was looking at you. Maybe you couldn't tell on the Zoom platform in my little square here.
I love it. I love it. Look, you cannot know how powerful your story is until you're willing to share it, to be quite honest. One of the things I don't know, I know I went through the story quite quickly, but when I was sitting in that jail cell at a mere 18 years old, I read Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And there was a saying that I was raised with, for bad that a good doesn't come. And I kind of always hated that, because I used to think, why does the bad thing even have to happen? And how is something good going to come from something bad? But to be quite honest, reading Maya Angelou's story, like we talked about, gave me, hope. It gave me a sense of things can be all right. This doesn't have to define me. These circumstances don't define me. And as I progressed through life and coming up against every obstacle, whether it was something I had created or something that happened to me, I learning to turn that around and reframe it. And so to anyone else who's looking to share their story, I'm honored. Through the pandemic, we're actually able, Unsugarcoated Media provided an internship program to dozens of USC film and media undergrads, as well as master programs around the world. They had all been shut out and sent home. Some, no lack of opportunities, staying away from family members in their home, to provide them with an opportunity to recognize that no matter who you are, where you're at, what you're dealing with, you can still inspire and encourage other people. You can still turn that around and do something. It doesn't take much to create social impact. A smile creates social impact. Just walk down the street and smile at somebody and see what that does. Imagine when you're able to find your story, find your messaging, and then turn around and share that with other people. Again, you will not know the power of it until you choose to do so. But what I find, and what I'm so honored to see, is that when people take a chance on themselves, start betting on yourself, and and see the outcome. It's an incredible moment. So there's always a little bit of fear. That's natural, but it's part of the process. Surround yourself with people that will support you, that can guide you. Find mentors. Mentors are so, I wish somebody had really put me on the idea of mentors younger in my life. And now I'm thankful. One of my main mentors is Larry Namer, the co-founder of E! Entertainment. He's one of my champions. He's one of my executive producers for our talk show. To see what's possible is only the beginning. But walk into it and see what happens. And look, if it doesn't work out the way that you want to, that's okay. There's no failing in trying. That's something that I always want to remind people. And, even my first novel, I'm actually in the process of going back and revising it, because as a writer, we're always like, well, I could go back and make that better, right? We grow in our skill and our knowledge, and hopefully, in our belief systems. And so it's always exciting to kind of go back and revisit that, and then say, how can I improve this and make it more impactful? But, it starts with that. It starts just with wanting to do it and knowing that you can make a difference.
I keep coming back to that image of jumping out of the plane, and just this, this sense of freedom and flight and weightlessness in that moment. And, that the story that you told, Jared, about that person who contacted you about his brother, it's just so poignant. And, for perhaps that individual to understand what was glorious to that his brother, in what, and reading it and in what you had shared. Any pearls of wisdom on your part for other media or writing professionals?
Yeah, so my original perspective was, this isn't an area that I'm explicitly asked to write about or cover. It's not my responsibility. There are other reporters who are better positioned to tell this story than I am. I'm not a mental health expert, so what role do I have? I don't have a responsibility here. In the years since, I've come to understand that it is exactly my responsibility as someone with a platform, as a journalist. I became a journalist many years ago, specifically because I was working for the school paper at my university. And I wrote a story that had a direct impact on people's lives. The school wasn't providing adequate wheelchair accessibility. There were students who were in wheelchairs who were struggling to get around campus. They came to me. I shared their story. few weeks later, they found room in the budget and there was construction happening on campus. And I said, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be able to help people through my writing. And so, selfishly, a few years ago, after I went through that experience, I thought, this isn't my responsibility. There are other people who are better positioned to write about this. I've since come around to the idea that it is exactly my responsibility, that, this is why I became a journalist. I think if you became a journalist for the right reasons, then it is also your responsibility as well. Because there is power in having this platform, and this is part of using it. And I don't mean to shame or pressure people into sharing their stories when they're not ready, but I think that it's I would hope that other reporters and journalists are looking for ways to use the platform for good. I hope that other journalists became journalists for the same reasons that I did, and with that in mind, I would strongly encourage them to share their story as widely as they can, because in an ideal world, that's why you're in this business in the first place.
Right, right. It's kind of so humanizes it and personalizes it, that there is this living, breathing, thinking, feeling human behind the words that are written on a daily basis, that there is a whole other life, it's not just the tip of the iceberg, it's all that lies underneath. I see Kath has popped back on, at least we can see her. Do we have any questions, Kath, or anything that others would like us to touch on in the remaining moments that we have?
It doesn't look like we have anything in the Q&A yet that I can see, but just as a reminder to all of our, excuse me, all of our attendees, if you do have any questions for Allison, Jared, or Aalia, you can please put those in the Q&A feature. And we do have just a couple minutes left for any, final remarks.
Right, right. So Allison, we'll start with you, and we'll, I'm looking on my screen, and Kath, if there are things that you would love us to touch on, please chime in.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to share. I think these are always great opportunities for us also to reflect back on the power of telling our stories and how it's really changed and shaped our lives. And to what Aalia mentioned, of just do it, right? Like, there is no harm in trying. And I think that you'll be so surprised at the difference you're able to make, and the lives you're able to change and assist along the way. And I will share, it's one of the most gratifying things to do, to know that you can inspire people to take care of themselves or do the next thing, the next right thing. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. So thank you, Kath and Ivets, for coordinating all of us and bringing us together to be able to have this conversation. And I welcome anybody that's tuning in live or recorded on the recorded version to reach out if they have questions. I'm always willing to share my experiences and how I did what I did and what I do now. And if they have anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out directly.
Aalia, any parting thoughts?
I was looking at Jared.
Jared, you go.
First of all, also, thank you so much. It really is an honor. I love when we're able to come together and just reinforce these ideas, and to even carry on what Jared said. It's so true. I do feel a sense of responsibility. I feel a sense of, if you're not willing to stand up for others, you shouldn't, I should say, you shouldn't be looking around, who's going to speak up? I mean, when you have the opportunity to do so yourself, you should. I think that it gives you, when, for example, even going back to films and things, or books that we write, when people know that you've been through it and that you really understand it, it gives you a different credibility with it, because you're speaking from actual experience. And not to say that everyone has to, but it helps, right? And so, and the other thing that I want to say is, even to something that I'm sorry, actually, I just went out of my head, but regardless, I want to say thank you so much. It's been amazing to be here, and I appreciate, and actually, I just remembered, depression. I love a little thing that actually Jim Carrey out there, depressed. When you are depressed, you need to depress yourself. Take the pressure off of what's happening in your life And that is okay. And so the different ways that we can create media to relay those messages and create those narratives that it is okay, that's what I love being part of. Thank you so much for your time and energy. And I'm just happy to be here. Have been here. Thank you.
Jared, you want to take us out?
I'll throw in a final thought since we're really running out of time here. So very quickly, yeah, just to go off of what you were just saying there, damn it, now I lost my train of thought. Oh, I was going to say that it is in a way therapeutic to share your story, that if you're keeping this bottled up inside of you and if you're the only one who is managing it, it makes it so much harder on yourself. And as scary as it is to share it with others and even scarier to share it with the whole wide world, it is in itself extremely therapeutic and it will help you. And the other thing I wanted to say, sort of the last note that I'm hoping to take us out on, is that the tide is turning in so many ways. And I've seen it in just the last couple of years. I'm sure everybody has during the pandemic. I've seen it over the last 5-10 years. You can pick any moment in time and you can see the progression. And it's very real. We have a long way to go as a society in talking about these things and being comfortable in addressing them. But the conversation has evolved so quickly in such a short period of time that if nothing else, you have to be encouraged by that. I'm so encouraged to see the difference between how my grandmother talks about this stuff or refuses to talk about this stuff and how my sister, talks about it with her friends and just, every sort of age group in between. And it seems like there's this acknowledgement that we all went through a really difficult few years. There's a level playing field right now. There's an opportunity. You're not going to find that many people who can't relate to your story anymore, or who refuse to acknowledge it. So I'm just, to end this on a positive note, I think we all stand on the shoulders of giants who have come forward and talked about this and told the world that you're not alone. And that conversation is only ramping up over time. And that is something that I'm really happy to see. So I'll finish it there.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. This has just been an amazing conversation, and we're so grateful to have you all here with us at Within Summit. So thank you for being here. To our attendees, as a reminder, you can rewatch this session in your attendee dashboard and also view the upcoming sessions for the rest of the day. And we look forward to seeing you again this afternoon. Thank you all so much. Bye.